Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
My Bigfoot sighting involved seeing a 15-footer. My name is Eric, and at the time of my sightings, I worked in a hospital, but currently I drive truck. I travel all over the country, all over the United States, and that's pretty much what I do. I guess I can just kind of dive right in and start telling you guys about my experiences with Sasquatch. The first instance I want to tell you about happened sometime around 2007, 2008, somewhere right around in there. And I was married to my first wife at the time, and I've always been an avid hunter. I mean, I grew up in a hunting family. My father, he taught me how to hunt, and he took me from a very early age, like I was maybe 5 years old when I first followed him out into the woods, and, we went and looked for pheasants and signs for deer and whatnot. And he taught me how to track and taught me to read the different signs and look on the trees for marks and whatnot and follow the different animal trails and actually smell the breeze, and to kind of, sometimes you can actually smell an animal before you see an animal if they're close by, because sometimes they have like a pungent odor and whatnot. So I've been hunting for a long time. I spent many, many years into the woods, and I had found a real nice property that I liked in northern Indiana. And I had talked to the farmer, and him and I got to be friends and whatnot. And I got the sole permission to hunt on that property, so no one else was allowed on there, just me. So I was used to parking my vehicle on a cornfield right next to the road. And from the road, there's a long fence line. It's mostly like old chokecherry trees and Osage orange, a few walnut trees here and there. But it's a long fence line that goes down between the cornfield, and then on the other side of it, he alternates between soybeans and wheat. So I walked down this long fence row, started walking. It usually takes me, good 20 minutes just to get down the first section of there to where I get to his big hayfield. Now this hayfield's kind of on a rolling hill before you get to the woods. You're traveling upward, and you're walking, between the hayfield and the cornfield, and it comes to the first corner of this woods, and this woods is mostly, I'd say it's got a lot of choke cherries, and it's got some walnuts and maples and some shagbark hickory trees in it. So it's a good area for wildlife. And this forest, it borders this, I call it a swamp, but Google calls it a lake, but it's not much of a lake. It's all mucky, and there's little floating islands out there on this so-called lake. I mean, if you step on them, you're going down to your neck. And then when you get off of them, then they'll float back up to the surface. But there's no bottom in it. So, I call it a swamp. The wood line kind of follows this little lake or swamp, as I call it. And I don't know if you've ever seen the old style can openers, where you do it by hand and you take your can of beans or whatever and you poke it in and you work it around. Well, that's kind of what the woods looks like as it kind of goes around there. There's like a point that juts out in the middle of the woods and kind of like hooks to the left a little bit. But that's about in the middle section of the woods. And the whole woods is kind of like on about a 45-degree slope. But in the center, running the whole center of the woods, is a ridge line. And there's a deer path, and you can walk that. And it's a fairly flat spot. And then on two spots, right in the very center of the woods, there is a bowl-shaped cutout where like a washout had come in and it made like a bowl shape there. And I'd say they're probably about 30, 40 yards in diameter. And in between the two, there's a pawpaw patch or like a little grove there of pawpaw trees. And then on the south side of it, the side opposite of the swamp, is where the cornfield is. And in that cornfield, there's like a little valley, and it goes right up into those bowl-shaped areas. And you can walk that valley, and you can walk that almost all the way out to the road without being seen if cars were coming by. And you can go across the road, and then there's another large woods with another swamp on that side. But the woods that I was hunting, it took me about 15, 20 minutes to get back to the hay field. And then I had to turn to my left and walk across that hay field about another 5, 8 minutes, something like that, till I got to the woods where there's a small area where some deer had broke through the briar bushes, so it was easier for me to enter the woods without making a lot of noise. And it's probably up on the highest point of that woods, right there where the hayfield meets it. So that's usually where I enter into the woods and then work my way down the ridge to where I had put my deer stand earlier in the spring. So I went down the ridge line and I'm walking real carefully, like my dad taught me, and trying to imagine that I'm walking on eggshells as I'm walking through the woods. Because, you step on a twig or you step on a leaf, it makes a sound, and you want to be as quiet as humanly possible when you're stalking into a woods, as a hunter. So that way you're not alerting the other, the animals in the woods that you're on your way out there. And so I'm like walking like my dad taught me, stepping one foot over the other real carefully, not trying to make any sounds as I'm walking down towards this ridge line. I'm walking, looking off to my right and looking off to my left to see if I see any signs of movement, because it's probably about noon when I'm entering this woods, because I know that I'm not going to see any deer sign usually till it gets closer towards evening, because that's when they get up and start moving around. But I like to get back there early enough to where they don't know that I'm there, or if they happen to catch me coming in the woods, that by the time they decide they're going to come back through, they don't think I'm there anymore. So I'm just kind of walking down this trail, taking my time, and I can see off in the distance the first bowl-shaped area where I've got my deer stand, and it's in a large beech tree. Now, that's a smooth bark tree, and it's an older growth forest, so it's a fairly large tree. I'd say it's probably, in the 40, 50-foot range, maybe taller, but it's in diameter. The tree is probably about 3 foot in diameter, this tree. And so I get to my tree, and, my stand, it's about 20, 25 foot up, somewhere right around in there. And the reason I put them up that high is because I learned early on when I was hunting A lot of guys like to put their stands about 10, 12 foot off the ground. And that just really isn't no good because, number one, the deer that you're hunting or whatever animal you're hunting, they can sense you because, as the breeze comes across, they can smell that, your scent. Or even if you use a cover-up scent, they can probably see your movement if you make any kind of movement. So I try to get about 20, 25 foot up in the tree. And that way I can, if I need to move a little bit, and turn my head or move my arms, that I'm not being noticed and I'm up high enough where they're not catching my scent. So this beech tree, there's no limbs on it up to my stand, and I didn't put any crank steps or anything like that because I like to keep my areas that I hunt a secret. Sometimes I've run into areas where, I'll hunt on public land where other hunters, they see your stand and then they decide they're going to slap one up right near it. And I just don't like to hunt around other hunters. I like to avoid them if at all possible. That way they don't get my deer that I'm after and they don't intrude upon my hunting. And, that way they don't mess it up for me or whatever, because I've had it happen a couple of times where other hunters have followed me into the woods just to see where I'm hunting. So I use logging spikes like what the lumberjacks use to climb the trees. And that's what I did. I climbed up, all the way up to the tree using them lumberjack spikes. And I had to really grip the tree because at the time I didn't have one of them safety belts. So I kind of had to bear hug the tree. And I'm a pretty big fella, I'm about 6'1" and about 250, 260 pounds. So I'm a pretty big dude. So I bear hugged the tree as I climbed up it. And as I got all the way up towards the top, reached up, grabbed my stand and, pulled myself the rest of the way up. And my stand is what I call a compression stand. It uses my body weight to grip the tree. So as I'm standing on it, it's digging into the tree and it doesn't move. Because like I said, I'm a pretty big old feller. So it ain't moving while I'm standing on it. So I get in there and I get myself comfortable and put my cover scent on and around me again just to make sure that, nothing's going to scent me. And I kind of hunker down and kind of get comfortable. I sit there for several hours and I'm pretty much just enjoying nature, watching the squirrels and the chipmunks and different birds. I think I seen a sparrowhawk fly by that day. And that was kind of a treat because I've only seen maybe 2 of them in that woods and you don't see them very often, but they make kind of a neat little sound, So I was sitting there and just kind of enjoying myself and enjoying nature. And before I knew it, it was getting close to what I like to call action time or happy hour or whatever when it comes to deer hunting, because right around the time that the last rays of sunlight hit, that's usually when the deer start coming in. And that particular woods is always better in the evenings. So there's some woods that I hunt that are produced more deer in the mornings, but that woods has always been the best in the evenings. So I'm just kind of sitting there and I'm getting my arrow, all knocked and ready in my bow. And I'm kind of, getting antsy, getting ready. And I can feel the momentum building because I know I'm going to see something and I'm going to get ready and get excited and shoot my deer. And then I'll be able to provide for my family because we live off the deer that I kill. That's how my family survived. That's how I grew up. The meat that I bring home, that's what we eat for the whole winter. And it's always been a staple for my family. So I'm waiting, and about this time, the last rays of sunlight start coming down onto the forest floor, and I start to hear a little bit of movement. So I'm looking over my left shoulder from where I'm sitting. Now my back is to the ridge line that I'm right up against, which tapers down at about a 45-degree angle down towards the swamp. Okay, and I'm looking out towards this bowl-shaped area, which, up above that is the cornfield, if that kind of helps a little bit. So I'm sitting there with my back to the swamp and the ridge line right up against it and looking down into this bowl-shaped area, and then up above is this cornfield. And I turn and I look to the left because there's like a little trail that comes up from that ridge line to that little valley area that I mentioned before in the cornfield. So I'm expecting to see something on that little game trail. So I'm just kind of looking there to my left, and I hear movement behind me. So I'm ready. I got my bow all perched there on my side and ready to draw back. And here comes off to the left side, over from that swampy area over the ridge, comes two nice sized does. And they come and they stop perfectly broadside to exactly where I planned on them stopping, because they usually kind of mosey around down that little bowl-shaped area before they head on up into the cornfield. Well, they stop perfectly broadside there. I'm noticing them, and I'm deciding which one, and I picked the bigger one, and I kind of draw back my bow because I'm ready to go ahead and shoot, and as I draw back my bow and I'm looking at this deer, making sure that everything's lined up perfectly, the one kind of stomps its foot and makes like a little snort. And I'm like, I don't think they busted me. So I just kind of like, out of the corner of my eye, I'm looking at them, and I'm like, well, okay, it's just now or never. And then the two deer kind of move again, and the one kind of stomps her foot again and snorts. And I look at her face. Now, my dad always taught me never to look into the eyes of your deer, because he says they'll bust you every single time. Well, this time I just happened to look up there, and all the years of hunting, like I said, I've been hunting since I was 5, and I'm 47 now. So I'd never seen a look of terror on an animal as what I saw right there. And I'm like, there's no way they saw me. There's just no way. There's no way they caught my scent. And they're looking directly behind me towards that ridge and towards the swamp. And, as I'm watching them, all of a sudden I get the whiff of this smell. And I'm like, oh, good Lord, what is that? And I thought to myself, well, them deer, when they come over, they must have come tromping through that swamp or something and kicked up some swamp gas, is what I start thinking. But then as I'm thinking that, it's starting to get more and more putrefied. I mean, it smells like, I want to say, putrid or rotten meat and garbage. And I don't think I've ever smelled anything so rank. I mean, it's bad. It's like a rotten carcass, mixed with like garbage from the dump. It's pretty bad. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, that can't be the swamp. So I kind of go to turn and look over my shoulder. And right as I went to do that, them two does, they bolted. And I'm like, oh crap. Well, at that exact moment, a log, and I'm saying this log's probably about maybe 1.5 feet to maybe 2 foot in diameter, and about 2 foot long, about 24 inches, because that's the farmer that owns that woods. He comes out every so often, and he'll cut down, a tree here and there, and one that's leaning, and he'll come back later, on in the week and load it up with his tractor. So this was an already cut log that had been laying back there, and it came flying up at my tree and hit about 5 feet below me, and it shook the whole tree when it hit me. Now that kind of jarred me a bit, and I'm thought to myself, what in the heck could that have been? You know what I mean? It scared me because I wasn't used to, things come flying up at me, from the forest. So I kind of froze. And as I froze, and I'm still trying to look out of the corner of my eye over my shoulder to the left, back towards that ridge in the swamp, something starts busting through the brush over to my right. So I swing my head like on a swivel towards my right. And as I'm doing this, it just, the shock, I think, of what I was seeing totally caught me off guard. I mean, it was like one of those things that you kind of do a triple take on, I mean, you kind of, no, I didn't just see that. I must be crazy, but as I turned to my right, I saw something that was bigger than anything I'd ever seen before out there in the forest. It didn't make any sense. I mean, I thought to myself, there's no bear out here. I've never heard of a bear out here in northern Indiana. I'd never run across one, and I've spent more time in the forest than most people. I mean, I think I spend more time in the forest than I do with my own family sometimes when it's deer season. So when I see this beast, this creature, I notice it's on two legs, and it's very broad. It has shoulders, that are very broad, and it's walking. And as it's walking, I guess it really wasn't walking. It's more like running. And I noticed, it's the back of its head, because I didn't get to see its face. I did not get to see the face on this thing. I just saw the back of its head and its shoulders down to about its waist as it was entering into the pawpaws. And these pawpaws were probably about 7-8 foot tall, at the beginning. And then they got bigger as you progressed into this little grove. And pawpaw leaves are pretty big leaves, and a lot of people use those in their landscaping and whatnot for like shade trees. But this thing entered into this pawpaw grove at a pretty good speed, and I could hear it crashing through the brush. But as I'm listening to this, I'm just thinking to myself, no, that couldn't have been a bear. It didn't make sense. And I thought, well, no, that might have been some kind of gorilla or some kind of, and I said, no, that doesn't make sense either. It couldn't have been one of those. So why would something like that be out there where I'm at? I'm not in the jungle. I'm in northern Indiana, and somebody would have seen something like that, I would think. So as this, I'm listening to this brush and trying to rationalize in my head what I'd just seen. The woods is probably about a half a mile long. Now, it would have taken me, even if I was running through the woods, there's lots of logs and brush, and it's not a real easy terrain to get through. It would have taken me probably about 15, 20 minutes to run to the other side of it, from where I was at. And this thing, it made it to the other end, and I want to say probably like less than a minute, maybe two. I don't even think it was that long. I mean, I would say probably less than a minute. And when it got towards that other end, and this is how I knew it was at that other end, because I couldn't hear it crashing no more through nothing, it let out this blood-curdling scream. I'd never heard anything like it in my entire life, and I couldn't even begin to duplicate it. It did not sound like anything I'd ever heard. It was kind of loud, and it was guttural, but it was like at a higher pitch, and it was just weird. And I heard that, and I thought to myself, what if it comes back? What if there's more than one of these things from where I'm at? And then I thought to myself, when this thing walked past, I'm like 20 feet up in the tree, and to me, just guesstimating the size of this thing, to me, this thing was probably every bit of 15 foot tall. And if it wanted to, it could have probably easily just jumped up and ripped me right out of that stand, but it didn't. it knew I was there. That's why it threw the log at me. And I think I pissed it off by trying to kill its deer. I've thought about going back to that spot and maybe making like a peace offering or something like that to it, maybe taking some apples or some blueberries or something like that and leaving them sitting there for them. But I've never actually gone back to that exact spot. I mean, I still hunt that woods. I hunt at either end, but I don't go into where I was hunting when I saw it. That's Sasquatch's spot. I mean, that's his spot. I don't, just like, you kind of give respect to other hunters. You try to give them room. That's what I do. I don't hunt his spot. That's his spot. I still hunt that same woods, but not that spot. So that's kind of the best I could tell you about, that experience. Now, his hair, I don't know if I mentioned it here before when I was talking, but his hair was, and it wasn't fur, it was hair. And it was like, kind of like orangey auburn. I mean, the best thing I could think of, it looked kind of like an orangutan's color of hair, like, what you see on National Geographic. It looked like that color of hair, but he was not no orangutan. There ain't no way. This thing was big. I'm guessing he was probably close to 15 foot tall. I mean, that's just my guess, because he could have reached up with his arms, grabbed a hold of me, and jerked me right out of that stand. No question. And I'd never seen anything that big. I was glad I was that high up, but I was thinking I was safe as he was walking past. But then I thought to myself later, no, he could have got you if he wanted you. He just didn't want me. I think he was just irritated that I interrupted his hunt. So that was my first experience with Sasquatch. But I will say this, I stayed up in that tree till 1:30 in the morning, and all this happened like right around 5:30 in the afternoon. So I stayed up there till 1:30 in the morning before I come back down, and I did it as quietly as possible. I get down to the bottom and I unbuckle those lumberjack spikes, and I do it real quietly. And the whole time I'm looking around, and I realized when I got down there that I did not bring a flashlight with me at all. So here I am in pitch black, in the dark, no flashlight. And I just kind of gather up my spikes, grab my bow and arrow, and flat out run as fast as I can through the woods, up that ridge, out into that hay field. I never stopped. I ran as fast as I could all the way across that hay field, down that fence line, all the way back to my truck. And I didn't stop till I got to the truck. I got inside, shut the door, locked it, and I started it up, turned the headlights on. And I thought, okay, we're safe. So, I mean, that was kind of, that was it. That was the first instance with Sasquatch that I had. The next one was roughly about a year later, and it was in a different woods or forest, and it was about 5 miles from where the first instance happened. Now, when I kind of looked at the area, I've looked at it on Google Maps, and I've kind of like scrolled down around and the area and the surrounding areas where all these, were my two occurrences that I would say where I actually had run-ins with Sasquatch. It seems like it's kind of like a pathway or like a travel route, because there's a lot of lowlands, there's a lot of waterways, and a lot of thick underbrush and forest, and they kind of like all make like a kind of straight line. So I'm guessing it's probably a travel route for Sasquatch to get from point A to point B, and he kind of stops along the way and whatnot. But this kind of happened about a year later, and I like to hunt away from other hunters, like I mentioned before, and so I usually start hunting early, like around noon, and I walk back to my area. And this particular area, it takes you at least a good 45 minutes to an hour to get back into and get settled in. And by the time you get settled in, you're ready to sit because you're kind of whooped from all that hiking and then climbing up a tree and whatnot and walking through swamps and avoiding other hunters. So you're walking out and around and trudging through the swamp. This area actually was a public hunting area, and it, had a small cornfield between the parking area and the forest. And then on the back side of the forest was a public lake. The lake kind of like floods up into the forest and kind of floods the forest. And a lot of guys don't like hunting back as far as I do, because if you don't got waders or hip boots or something of that fashion, you're going to get wet because you're going to wade through the water in the swamp to get back to these areas where these bigger bucks hang out. And they know the other hunters don't go up there because all these other hunters kind of line their stands right along that cornfield. And I don't. I go walk out into the swamp, and I walk, like I said, takes me a good 45 minutes to get to my stand. And the nice part about it is, because if you do get a deer, you can float it right on out because they will float right on the surface of the water. And I've had to do that a couple times. But yeah, so I kind of start hunting, about noon and work my way towards my stand. And I hike back there, and I kind of cut off through the swamp, and it's really foggy. I've been hiking back there before, and I've come out of the woods and had other hunters say that they seen a ghost walking out in that swamp, and it looked like, they seen a hunter, and then he disappeared, and then he reappeared further down. And I always knew they were talking about me because I try the best I can to be as quiet as I can and avoid other hunters. So I really kind of walk out and around. I take my time. So I get back there to this particular area that I'm going to hunt, and I'd been kind of watching it for a while, and I'd seen a lot of deer using this same path and walking into this same area. And this time I'm hunting in the morning. So I walked back there in pitch black at night through the swamp. And I get to my stand, which I'd put up earlier, before season started. I put it up in this tree. And this tree is it's a maple tree, but all around it, kind of like in a circle, it has shoots that come up off the root system. And there's these, I don't know if I would call them saplings or other starts from other trees, but they're probably about 6 inches in diameter. And they're about maybe 16, 20 foot tall, little shoots that come off these root system. But there's like a circle of them around this main tree that I'm on. And this main tree is probably about, maybe 2.5 foot, 3 foot in diameter. And it's a maple tree. And I got my stand, like I always do, up high, about 20 foot up. And that way these other saplings, they kind of provide cover for me, so the deer won't see my movement and whatnot, and it kind of keeps me concealed a little bit from other hunters when they come walking by. I've had other hunters walk right underneath my stand and not even know I was there. But so I'm sitting there and up in my stand. I get up there, and it's turning out to be a nice morning. It's foggy, but the sun's starting to pop out, and I see these 2 does come walking in right where I expected them to come walking in, right out of the swamp, right into this little wooded area that sits back there up, just out of the marshy area a little bit, and come walking right to me. Well, I take this opportunity, and I draw back and I line up my shot, and I make a perfect broadside shot, and my arrow blows right through this deer and sticks into the dirt behind it. It gets maybe, 3 or 4 steps away, and it's over. It's that fast. It was a perfect shot, perfect lung shot. It took out both lungs. It was quick and painless and over quickly. So I'm all excited. I could tell it's done, it's over with. So I still give it an extra 15 minutes, just to make sure that, because I've had deer that I got a little too excited and went there early and they jumped up and ran, and I had spent half the day tracking them, and that's never fun. So I just I gave it the extra 15, 20 minutes and just kind of sat there. And at the end of that time, I kind of worked my way down from my tree and went over and grabbed my arrow. And I'm looking at the arrow, and it's covered in blood. It's got a little bit of fur on it, on the arrow fletches, or they're like a synthetic feather now. I call them fletches. And then I walk over to my deer and I admire my kill, and I take a picture with my cell phone. So I go ahead and I gut my deer, and I leave the guts right there at that spot, and I start to dragging my deer out. Well, it took me a lot longer, because it took me 45 minutes to walk in. It takes a little bit longer when you're dragging something, that's around 100 pounds out of there. I'm dragging my deer out, and I eventually make it out to where the cornfield is, and I set my deer there, and I walk back to my truck, because I'd had about enough dragging. By that time, I was pretty winded. Walk back to my truck, and I drive across the field and load up my deer. Took it to the check-in station and all that. And that day I checked in my deer. Well, I got to thinking while I was there at the check-in station, I still got 2 more tags. I think I'll go back to that exact same spot, and I think I will go ahead and see if I can get me another deer. So that's exactly what I did. I turned around after I checked in my deer, and I took it home, hung it up in the garage, and I went right back to my spot. Well, I get to this property, and I start walking in, and as I'm taking my time and walking in, through the swamp, and I take the 45-minute walk back through the swamp to my spot, I'm noticing things are quiet. I don't notice anybody else in the woods, so I'm kind of thinking, okay, good. This is going to be a good hunt. There's no other hunters out here today, and I'm not going to see nobody, so I'm going to get me another deer and add it to the freezer. So I finally get back to where my tree is, and that's when I noticed something weird. First thing I noticed, those 6-inch in diameter saplings that were kind of like all the way around my tree, as I mentioned, kind of like circled my tree. Every one of them was snapped off at about 2 to 3 foot off the ground and bent over. They were like snapped, like somebody had, I don't know, like Hercules came over there and snapped them, because there's no way any human could have done that. I don't care if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger or who you are. There ain't no human strong enough to do that. They were broke. Now, they weren't broke this morning, but they were broke now. And they were snapped off. Every single one of them was snapped off and facing away from the tree. So all of my cover that I had for being in that stand was gone. I stood up like a sore thumb if I was going to sit there. And I just got to thinking to myself, now what on earth could have possibly have done that? There hasn't been any high winds today. It's been calm. It's been quiet. It's been nice and sunny. There was not even really a breeze. And then I kind of look off to my right, where this morning, where I had taken my shot at my doe, and where my arrow had went through and had stuck in the ground, all the leaves for probably about a 3-foot in diameter circle, all the leaves from where that arrow had stuck in the ground had been brushed away, and it was a bare spot there on the ground. It was just empty, just right there, bare dirt. And I thought to myself, now that's really odd. What would have done that? So then I thought, And all this time that I'm standing there, it's dead silent. I'm not hearing nothing. It's just quiet as could be. And I look over by where I left my gut pile this morning, and it's gone. It's gone. I'm like, it's only been a couple hours, and something wouldn't have found it and done that already. But it's gone. Well, I started to get real uncomfortable at that point, and I thought, something's here. I don't know what it is, but something's here. And I felt real uneasy, especially since there was no noise, and usually that kind of thing happens when some kind of a predator comes into the woods. I've had that kind of thing happen when I was out west and hunting mule deer, and I had a mountain lion come up into the area where I was at, and things got quiet real quick. Well, that same kind of thing happened there. It got quiet real quick, and I thought, you know what? I don't think I'm going to hunt this spot no more. I think I'm done. So I turn around and I start backing out real careful, because I knew something was totally wrong. I didn't, the whole thing was wrong. The whole area, it just wasn't right. Something was wrong. Something did not like that I had been there and that I had harvested a deer, and it was irritated. I just got that gut feeling, and I thought, it's time to go. So I left. Now, I still hunt that woods also, but not that spot. That's Sasquatch's spot. He gets his spot, and I got mine in a totally different area from there, 200 yards away. He has his spot. My spot's way over here. We still hunt the same woods, but not the same spots. I gave him plenty of room, just like I would respect another hunter. And, that's his area. This over here is mine. But, that day I kind of left. Now, it was funny because later on that hunting season, I don't know, maybe about 3 weeks later, it was still bow season. And my dad, he wanted to go out hunting with me. So I said, all right, we're going out there. And I said, well, I'm going to hunt over here. And he says, well, your stand was over here. And I said, yeah, but I'm not going over there. You can go over there if you want. And he says, well, I'll go on over there and hunt. He says, you just killed a deer out of that spot. And I'm like, yep, sure did. And he's like, well, I'm going over there and I'm going to try and tag me in one of your deer. And I says, oh, well, you do what you feel, you want to do. So he went on over there and he hunted that spot that particular morning, while I hunted my spot way over here down yonder, away from Bigfoot spot. So about 11 o'clock in the morning, he comes back down a trail, and he comes over to me and he says, Eric, why did you mess up that stand? And I says, what do you mean? And he says, well, all that perfect cover that you had with all those branches and stuff, those saplings that came up through there, he says, you tore them all down, and you stand out like a sore thumb up there. He says, I didn't see a darn thing, because anything that would have come through there would have seen me from a mile away. I said, well, here's the story behind that. And I did not do that. And I told him the story. And then I told him the story about the other woods that I'd been hunting in and had my run-in with Sasquatch. And then he just looked at me and he says, you jerk, you sent me in there to be a sacrifice to Sasquatch. I says, no, I did not. I told you I wasn't going in there. I said, you can do what you want, but I wasn't going in there. That's just, I didn't want to tell him about all that because I didn't want to think I was nuts or nothing. But I went ahead and told him afterwards. And he says, you sent me in there to be sacrificed, be Sasquatch's dinner. I said, well, Dad, I don't think that Bigfoot eats people. I says, I think he eats like deer and maybe berries and whatnot. I don't think he eats people. I think he's an omnivore like us, but I don't think he eats people. I think he gets mad at people when they go in his, they mess up his hunt, but I don't think he eats people. So after telling him about that, and him have, noticed, and he says, well, yeah, I could see how, a Sasquatch could have done that, because he says, there's no way that you could have done it. I was trying to figure out how you did it, how you broke the branches. He says, I thought maybe you climbed to the top of them and was swinging on them till they snapped. And I says, there is no way I would do that. I says, that's number one. I'm getting a little bit too old to be doing stuff like that, I says, I don't heal as fast as I did when I was in my 20s, because at that time I was like in my 30s when all that, the Sasquatch sightings happened. But I says, no, I'm not doing anything like that, So, but from that point forward, my dad, he was pretty well hooked. I mean, every single day, that's all I saw him looking into, reading about Sasquatch and watching Sasquatch, the BFRO on TV and finding Bigfoot and all that stuff. And he was, I think it drove my mother half nuts because she says, that's all your dad watches is stuff about Bigfoot. Well, he's a believer. And I says, Mom, and it's real. She's like, oh, whatever. You're just pulling my leg. Some people, unless they see Bigfoot firsthand and they actually see the actual creature, they're just not going to believe. And then some people like my dad, all he needs to do is see the evidence of it. He's hooked, he believes it. Well, and then there's people like my mom that are skeptics. Nothing that you can say will convince them otherwise. To her, it was a big joke. And matter of fact, it still is, because my dad, he's dead and gone now, but she always told me I should go get one of those big cutout silhouettes of Bigfoot and go set it out there by his grave and whatnot, because he was so addicted to anything Bigfoot. I said, no. I said, I don't think the cemetery would let us do anything like that. But those were the two definite Bigfoot occurrences that I had. Now, I had one more thing that I got to thinking about it, and it's a possibility. It could have been Bigfoot. I was 16, and my best friend and cousin had moved out to Oregon, out around the Portland area. So I flew out there when I was 16 to go spend the summer with him. And he had just got a brand new Datsun. Well, it was new to him. It wasn't new, but it was a Datsun pickup truck. It was a 2-wheel drive, and it was a stick shift. And while his mom was at work, we decided that we were just going to go take off and go off into the mountains and go camping. Well, I was there for 3 months, and then I was supposed to fly back home. Well, we took off on the first week, and we didn't come back till the last week. So his mom we left while she was at work. She had no idea where we was. I mean, here we were, two 16-year-old boys taking off into the wilderness with nothing but sleeping bags, fishing poles, and a K-bar knife. And the two of us, we just took off. So we ended up around the foothills of Mount Hood is where we were at. And we ended up at this place. It was called Elk Lake. And I have a hard time finding that on the map, but my cousin could drive us right to it because he'd spent so much time up there. But you take this old Jeep trail, and it looks just like the Jeep commercials. There's rocks popping out of the ground, and it's like a 1-lane road going all the way up this mountain. And you get about halfway up, and it's kind of got like a plateau up there, and there's a lake, and this lake's crystal clear, and it's all water coming up from the ice cap up on the top, the mountain of snow or whatever, and it kind of runs down this it's a creek, and it kind of runs down into this lake and fills up this lake, and then from the other side it kind of runs off and keeps going. Well, this water is crystal clear, and there's these what they call Oregon newts that are swimming around. There's billions of them. They're all over. And then there's these golden trout is what they are. I don't know if you've ever seen a golden trout, but they're high up in the mountains and the lakes and whatnot. And I don't think they're really anywhere else, but that's where they're at. So we make our way up through the mountain, and I'm closing my eyes most of the way because I'm looking off of a cliff as we're driving, and we're bouncing up and down and whatnot in this little 2-wheel drive truck, which we had no business taking that up there on that mountain. But we get up there, and it's summertime, and we're enjoying ourselves. We're out there fishing and taking hikes, and it's all redwood forest up there. And and I think the one evening that we were there, I actually have a picture of it. Me at 16 years old catching a quail with my bare hands. I had there was a quail in this pine tree, and we saw it. It was calling to us. It was a bobwhite quail, and my cousin, I told him, I said, "Hey, go off to the to the left and kind of circle around so that way that bird's watching you, and I'm going to sneak up right behind it. And he did, and we both moved real slow, and I moved real careful, and I got right up to the bird and I snatched it with my bare hands right out of the tree. And we ate that night. It was much to eat. It was like a chicken nugget, I would say, but we split it between the two of us, our little chicken nugget, and we were eating trout when we could catch them. And I think we even ate a couple chipmunks. I mean, we were really living off the land. Like I said, we had nothing but fishing poles and a sleeping bag and an old K-bar knife. So we were kind of roughing it. But the one night I can recall this weird instance happening. Our spot was right next to the lake, and it was just a little opening inside this redwood forest, just a small opening, like maybe 15 foot in diameter. And that was just enough room for us to have a little campfire and have our sleeping bags around it and whatnot. And so it was dark, and the fire was kind of working its way down. But the two of us were, we'd been talking most of the night and whatnot, but we'd eventually fallen asleep. And we heard this noise, and it came running right through our camp area, or maybe off to the side slightly, but it sounded like it was right there. It sounded like, it woke us both up right out of a dead sleep. And it sounded like, the only thing I could compare it to is a guy running on pavement with combat boots. And it was loud, and it came running right through our camp. And that's what woke us up. And I'm not sure what it was, but at the time, the only thing that we could rationalize in our minds that it could have been was maybe it wasn't elk, because we were at Elk Lake, and there were elk there, and there were timber wolves there, and there were bears there, and all kinds of stuff. But we thought, well, maybe that was an elk. But as I look back at it, I think to myself, because we didn't hear nothing after it come crashing through the camp. And it was loud. And I got thinking to myself, I don't think elk make that much noise when they just got these hooves, and I don't think they make that much noise when they go running. It sounded like a person with combat boots running on pavement is what it sounded like. And it was, it was rocky terrain, but it was, there was pine needles everywhere and whatnot. And there was this moss on top of it. So, it shouldn't have made that much noise if it was an elk. I got to thinking maybe when I was 16 and we were woke up, maybe that was a Bigfoot. I don't know, but it's a possibility, because now knowing what I do know, that Bigfoot does exist, and that after listening to various podcasts since I've been, on the road a lot lately, I know that they're out there in that Mount Hood area. So it could have been. You never know. That's pretty much all of my experience with Bigfoot. That's everything I got. I know he's real. I've seen him firsthand. So no matter what anybody says, nobody's going to convince me otherwise. I've tried to tell people before, and people, just kind of laugh and it's like, yeah, right, But my dad, he believed me. He saw what Bigfoot had done around that tree, and he knows there's no way a person could have done that. He believed me to his dying day that there was a Sasquatch out there in them woods. At least one. I don't know if there's a whole family, but there's definitely at least one. So that's my story.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.